Breaking news just in, Tim. Exciting times for the US. Kamala Harris has picked her vice president, but is Tim Walz the man who can help beat Donald Trump? I note that the Republican nominee for vice president, J.D. Vance, has already attacked the decision, saying she didn't pick Jewish Josh Shapiro because he's pro-Israel.
And with Elon Musk now facing the wrath of Downing Street over his claim that Britain is on the brink of a civil war, we ask if the billionaire owner of X is enabling the far right. And is it good or bad that very controversial figures like Tommy Robinson have been allowed back onto the platform?
Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Camilla Tominey.
And I'm Tim Stanley.
Tim, I'm going to say Kamala Harris. How are you saying it?
I'm going to say Kamala.
Okay, fine. We just have to settle on that because there's so many different interpretations.
The rule is supposedly Kamala, but when people say Americans say Kamala, there are so many different American ways of saying the word comma. So if this is the East Coast, you'd say Kama. So I'm just not sure.
No.
I don't think it matters.
Also, you don't agree with me calling J.D. Vance Vance?
I think it's Vance because I'm English, and likewise, I really don't like saying Kiev. Can we just say Kiev? It's Kiev.
All right.
Chicken
okay.
Kiev? No, thank
Right.
you.
Let's just agree to disagree on pronunciation, which I'm finding difficult to say. I might just call her Harris. I think that's easier.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is interesting, isn't it? Tim Walz for VP for Kamala.
Yes.
Because we were all expecting it to be Josh Shapiro.
Yeah.
Who's a bit controversial because Republicans quite like him. He's pro-Israel and not quite as progressive as he needs to be.
Interesting.
I know, but instead we have to talk about Tim Walz, who is very progressive, Nebraskan, age 60, looks kind of, like somebody who might dress up as Santa Claus at Christmas and entertain local school children.
Governor of Minnesota, he ticks the box of looking like a rural soccer dad.
Yeah.
He was a teacher, he taught high school football, etc. But his politics are actually really progressive. This is someone who was pro-gay rights early on, who as governor has supported abortion rights, who has banned conversion therapy, lots of progressive economic stuff as well. He passed some sort of Taylor Swift law about being able to access tickets for a Taylor Swift concert. So this is
which we can all support.
We can all support. So this is a classic populist progressive, someone who combines the look with politics, which are not going to drive away left-wingers. And the fear with Josh Shapiro was that he was kind of the opposite. He looked like a progressive, and his politics were actually a little more centrist, and that might have driven away some liberal voters.
But it would have been more balanced, wouldn't it, to have progressive Kamala and less progressive Shapiro. Now we've got Kamala and her left-wing buddy-in-chief, very solidly Democratic. I mean, I suppose the advantage is it doesn't annoy people on the left of the Democratic Party.
The joke was whoever Kamala Harris chooses, they're going to be a straight white guy. Okay, I think that was the joke. And if you think about who Hillary Clinton went with, Tim Kaine, right?
I had actually forgotten
whose name is now going to be
Hillary. What?
I get 10 points for remembering.
Well done.
So this is the thing: is if there's kind of a nervousness in progressive circles, if we're going to run with a candidate who makes history, a woman of color, then perhaps we need to balance it with someone who is none of those things. Partly because the polls are really tight. You need to not just win independents, but win people over from the other side. So this is all about pitching to Trump voters in Rust Belt states. So the best person to do that is someone who looks like a Trump voter. Also,
is there a kind of elder statesman, younger woman vibe going on there? Because Trump picks Vance. He's much younger. He's professorial. He's professorial, whereas Trump obviously isn't. So there's some good yin and yang there.
Yeah.
Maybe
they're about the same age. Harris and Walz are about... She's older than she looks.
How old is she?
She's in her late 50s,
I'm
I
Googling
believe.
Googling it now.
Now, I know that by presidential standards, that makes her a strapling.
Yeah,
positively adolescent, but...
Literally, I would say that this woman's in her 40s. Good grief. She's 59.
Yeah, she's looks very, very good.
That's like Starmer being older than Nigel Farage.
I think Mama does Pilates. That's what I would say.
Wow. Okay, I thought she was younger than that. So, then they're very
they're about
evenly matched. They're of the same generation.
Yeah.
Do we think that she has now got a hope of beating Trump?
Oh, more than that. I think she's going to beat Trump.
do you?
So for the first time ever, Nate Silver now puts her ticket ahead of Trump.
Explain who Nate Silver is.
Nate Silver is regarded as the golden standard for polling in the United States.
He's
famous
there,
for
John Curtis.
Right, he's famous for getting elections right when other people got them wrong, etc. And he, for the first time in his general pulling together of different polls, reckons that she is pulling ahead. Now, of course, the thing is, you can pull ahead in popular vote. And if you look at all the polls, all the nationwide polls that have come out, she's ahead by about 2, 3, 4 points. The problem with that, of course, is that Hillary Clinton was ahead by that kind of percentage back in 2016. What matters is winning the 270 electoral votes.
Yeah.
And as we keep saying, the Democrats have a difficult path. And part of the reason for that is because Trump is so popular in the Rust Belt. I think at this stage we're more or less ruling out the Southwest, places like Arizona. And the Democrats have realized they've got to win Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Now, some polls show Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, for instance, tied in Michigan. Biden was behind. And I think what this indicates is that the problem with the Democrat ticket was Joe Biden.
Yes.
The economy is not bad. I know there's been a stock market tumble, but the American economy is not bad. Donald Trump is very unpopular. He has never had good approval ratings pre the assassination. That may well have changed the dynamic a bit. If the Democrats could just get someone who could combine experience with a popular dimension, then I think they can win it. I think a path does open for them.
The thing about the assassination attempt is he could have used it as this vehicle to kind of unify. He did say that initially, I'm going to be thoughtful and reflective.
Yeah.
We all laughed and said, no, you're just not capable of that. And initially, in that first speech he did after the event, after he was nearly killed, he was a little bit reflective, and then he just completely reverted to type. And now we've had all of these attacks. Like, if you're trying to appeal to soft Democrats, and particularly if you're trying to grow your Hispanic and ethnic vote, you absolutely do not go about that by questioning how black your opponent is.
Yes. Well, he did it in the convention speech, which lasted about 8 hours. And he begins with his account of the assassination. The bullet came so close. It came so close. It was an amazing thing.
That's a really good impression.
In his very and then
Can we have more
and then
of that,
about
please?
half an hour in, it was Nancy Pelosi turned on him like a dog. Like a dog.
It's also because you've got the mannerisms.
It all starts out with that. But so he couldn't even contain himself within the speech, and he famously went off. I'm already doing as soon as you start doing Trump, you start doing the hands. But he immediately within the speech, he started going off the speech, and he couldn't help himself. He couldn't contain it. And you're absolutely right to question the ethnicity of the first woman of color to run for the presidency. It's a bad look when you need women, you need independents, you need moderates. He just can't help himself with
Also, what was he saying as well? It's like, it's not just bad that she's a socialist. She's a female socialist. Women everywhere going, you're such an idiot. Even if I don't agree with Harris's politics, which I don't really. This is the other thing we need to stress about Harris. Last time I discussed it with Kamala, I sort of held back a bit. Then I ended up writing this column saying, I've had an epiphany. I know who she reminds me of, and it's Meghan. Then I was accused of being a racist. What I was actually saying when I was making that comparison is both have a habit of spouting complete word salad, and you can't quite understand what the hell they're talking about. Achingly progressive, desperate to be liked on the chat show circuit, often film themselves receiving calls or texts from other celebrities. The Obamas in Harris's case, in Meghan's, remember on the Netflix documentary, Beyonce's just texted.
Yes.
Harry. Has she really? What she said? And then also, horrible allegations of bullying in the background. Championing women's empowerment in one breath, and then, concerns over how she might treat female staff. Just going to say that very carefully.
She embodies the progressive spirit of her generation, which is the spirit of human resources, right? The word salad, it's people who say complete nonsense, but they think it's terribly profound, and you can imagine it being stuck on a fridge in an office, where she keeps saying, we need to imagine what could be unburdened by what has been.
Yes.
And of course, she puts these pauses between each of these things as though she's thinking it for the first time, flashbacks to Hillary's, I like to call it trumped up trickle down.
Or she doesn't put pauses in. She just laughs.
Or she laughs
at her
maniacally.
own statements.
And the worst one was when she took those actor kids to see some space stuff, and she does this really creepy impersonation of a mother-like figure and saying, "You are going to see space."
Can I just say, when it comes to impersonations, you haven't got a leg to stand on. During this podcast, we've had Trump, we've had Kamala, we've had everyone.
Tim Stanley's a nasty individual. He's a horrible person. He's a lot of people saying it around the office. He's a horrible person. I don't know why the Telegraph hires him.
Also, you proponent of fake news. We're going to get onto that in just a moment, by the way, when we discuss Elon Musk and Tommy Robinson et al. But the other thing that slightly annoys me about this whole campaign is you make criticisms of Harris and then the retort is, yeah, but, compared to Trump.
Yeah.
We should not have that as the comparison bar.
Yes.
We should be saying, compared to other brilliant statesmen and women that have, graced US political history.
Yes.
We shouldn't be saying, oh, well, but Trump's rhetoric's also rubbish, or, oh, they both say stupid things.
Yeah.
This is how low the bar has now been set.
She is no Shirley Chisholm, the first woman of colour to run for a major party ticket in 1972. She is no Shirley Chisholm. And let's not forget that in 2020, when she ran in the primaries, she dropped out. She was so unpopular, she dropped out before the primaries began. 2024, of course, it's Biden in the primaries. She hasn't won a single vote yet, and yet she is probably going to just be gently eased into the White House. Because Trump is so unpopular. And that adds to people's sense of the system being quite undemocratic. And I think there's a parallel with Labour. Labour has been elected because the Tories are really unpopular, not because Labour's popular. It's won, if you take out non-voting, it's got into office on about 20% of the vote, in many seats with just a third of the vote, and without it actually telling us what it's going to do. And I bet we're going to have exactly the same kind of vacuous, under-scrutinised campaign from Kamala. But then you know whose fault that is? The Republican Party. They could have chosen someone else, and they stuck with the Donald.
Also, I'm just thinking that the one person watching this very closely, keeping his fingers crossed that the polling goes in his favour, is David Lammy, because it's certainly going to be it's going to be easier for the Foreign Secretary to deal with Harris and Walz than, let's be honest, Trump and Vance, despite the fact that he's started a little bromance with Vance because they both apparently were brought up in a cardboard box in the middle of the street before being educated well and achieving high political office. Right, coming up next, we're going to be discussing Elon Musk, whether he's enabling the far right and whether Tommy Robinson belongs anywhere near X. Well, Tim, it's on the front of all of the newspapers today, including the Telegraph. The headline is Starmer in spat with Musk over riots. And this comes after Elon Musk claimed that civil war is inevitable because of all of the unrest we've witnessed in the UK over the course of the last 7 days. The billionaire owner of X has been rebuked by Downing Street. I think that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
A spokesman for the Prime Minister has said there's no justification for him saying this.
Yeah.
In general, what do you make of Elon Musk?
What do I mean? So everyone says he's a free speech warrior, and I'm a skeptic about free speech. I'm all for it. But I think when a lot of people say they want free speech, what they really mean is they want the space for their own argument to be advanced in. And I think Elon Musk is a classic example of that. The historical figure that he reminds me of is Henry Ford, the American manufacturer who came up with the Model T Ford, gave ordinary Americans a car in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Someone who used his wealth and his power also to advance his very right-wing politics. And there is a theory, an interesting one, that Donald Trump and Elon Musk represent the revenge of the owner-manager form of capitalism in the United States. So it used to be the case in America that you invented something or you bought a newspaper, you owned it outright and you controlled it. And for a long time, that's how American capitalism operated, until the 50s and 60s when companies start to go public. And then you start to get shareholders involved. And then corporate boards begin to run things. And the original family that would own things would slowly lose their control over it. And what's somewhat surprising is that those companies that have gone public also started to become a little more liberal and a little more woke in their politics. And there's an argument that Donald Trump is the revenge of people who own and manage things, because Donald Trump owns his company and he manages it, and so does Elon Musk. And if you look at, there are certain Fordian qualities to Elon Musk. So, for example, classic example of the owner-manager psychology, Henry Ford despised trade unions. He said, I don't need trade unions. I'll just pay my workers well. Trade unions come between me and them. Elon Musk doesn't like trade unions, has done his best to stop trade unions in his company, says, I don't need them. I pay my workers well. Although
those left of them.
And
he
unions
sacked a lot of workers at X, of course.
Yeah, of course. 4/5, when he took over Twitter, he sacked 4/5 of the people working there. Another example, Elon Musk wants to go into space. He's a utopian. He's a futurist. Henry Ford created a model town, Ford Landia, in the Amazon. Where he planned to produce rubber that would go into his car factories, and the town was so poorly designed because Ford had this allergy to experts. He wouldn't talk to people who actually knew how to make rubber work as an industry. It was poorly designed. The project collapsed, and today Fordlandia is this sort of ghost town in the middle of the Amazon. But it was in the same way that Elon Musk wants to put us on Mars and build an ideal human community. Ford was going to fill Fordlandia with dance halls, and he even built a golf course so that the workers would be entertained. Again, you don't need unions. I'll look after you. So there's a kind of a right-wing billionaire's ideology behind all of this. And of course, if you fast forward to the modern day, we were used to the idea that Silicon Valley was really progressive and liberal, and much of it still is. But Silicon Valley is a land of rich entrepreneurs who don't like being told what to do. They don't like being told how to run their companies. They didn't like COVID. And Elon Musk talks about this woke mind virus as though there is this kind of progressive attempt to reshape the way Americans think. And that's what he is using free speech to fight back against.
But that is appealing, isn't it? Because he is kind of a lone voice in the right-wing entrepreneurial scene.
There are lots of them. There's Peter Thiel.
There's lots of them, but they're not
and
as
there's J.D.
vocal.
Vance.
Oh, right, there's J.D. Vance.
He was a venture capitalist who worked with Peter Thiel.
I know, and he's actually assumed a political position. This is the thing, right? Entrepreneur activists, and whether they should be allowed. I mean, he's not content with having this billion-dollar business and indeed wanting to conquer space. He also wants to have a platform to share his views, even though he's not an elected representative. That could be controversial. But what I mean is, usually these days, establishment figures are unrelentingly woke.
Yeah.
They are progressive.
Yeah.
They are, we must all support the Democrats, be it people in showbiz, people in music, people in Silicon Valley, as you've referenced. So Musk has this kind of USP that he is a righty and he isn't afraid to admit it.
And part of the reason why he's not woke is because his son transitioned into becoming a girl. And that is one reason why Elon Musk is very critical of woke stuff, because it has affected him personally. And because he's so public about his views, we've been able to trace the evolution of his ideas. And I would say, look, he has a genuine commitment to free speech. I think that's absolutely true. But I think it's free speech with a purpose. I think the principle behind it is if we allow everyone to speak, then people will realize that left-wing ideas are illogical and people will reject them.
Well, let's get into that, because he describes himself, as you say, as a free speech absolutist. But surely there must be limits on free speech. We are limited in what we say on the Daily Tea podcast in the same way that we're limited by what we say in the newspaper, both print and online, by the regulator, in our case, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, and the law.
Yeah.
We can't go around spreading misinformation, defaming people, being in contempt of court, because we are mainstream media. MSM, the enemy at the moment, it seems. So
just say fundamentally, we are responsible for what we publish. So if a Nazi writes a letter to our newspaper or a communist writes a letter to our newspaper, we don't automatically publish it.
No.
We don't just put content up.
And we check our facts.
And we check our, yes.
We check our facts.
Because there are consequences
check
for us.
Yes.
In a way obviously there's private litigation, things like that, but there just isn't the same degree of consequence on social media for what people put up.
And we give people a right of reply. Now, this is important just in terms of being a journalist, because you're not necessarily editing yourself when we write our comment pieces. We try and speak freely, channeling what we believe, but we always have to be conscious of how is this going to be playing out in the letters page. If, for instance, I learnt this as a young hack on the Hemel Hempstead Gazette. I once got a story about the refurbishment of the local cinema so wrong that I described one man called Bill Stevenson as Bill Tomlinson, or the other way around. And he sent in this letter. I've still got it. I should frame it and put it in the toilet. Like, this girl has written just such what is she talking about? And I remember going up to the editor and going, we're not going to publish this, are we? And he goes, well, of course we are.
Yeah.
You've got it all wrong.
Yeah.
This will be... So we accept as journalists that if we get it wrong, and we try not to, we are exposed in the letters page, because if you give it out, you've got to take it back.
Yes. So just to step in and say, so we do believe in free speech, obviously,
Yes.
but we believe also in consequences. So the free
Yes.
speech is essentially controlled by consequence, either legal, regulatory, or our own conscience. And it seems to me the difference with social media is the consequences are entirely ad hoc. So there are consequences to putting something controversial on social media, which is things like pylons or your career being
Yes.
ruined. But broadly speaking, you can theoretically put up literally anything.
Yeah, so you can be cancelled because of something you tweeted years ago or recently or whatever. You can also be sued. I mean, in the case of Elon Musk, he got sued by the guy who helped the victims of the Thai cave saga. Do you remember all that? And he basically suggested that guy wasn't in it for all of the best reasons. I don't want to defame him again, so let's not repeat the defamation. But he was horrible about him, and basically the guy came back and said, this is totally unsubstantiated, I'm going to sue you. So yes, there are limits. Then let's talk about, so legal limits do apply if they are applied, and then they're often only applied by people with the means to do so, which is problematic, people who can afford to get lawyers involved. Let's just talk in its purest form about Tommy Robinson's rights to free speech on the platform that is X. He was deplatformed by Jack Dorsey's Twitter back in 2018 when he had around 400,000 followers. Musk lets him back onto the platform in November 2023. That's quite controversial. Lo and behold, his followership goes up to 800,000.
Right.
We've been tracking him this week. We mentioned this yesterday. He's basically pumping out about 15 posts an hour, most of them anti-Muslim, pointing out Islamic extremism, but also sort of perpetuating quite a lot of different tropes about Muslim people. And he's doing this presumably, Tim, because he did once have a platform. This is the interesting thing about Robinson, or we should call him by his proper name, which is Stephen Yaxley Lennon. Actually, Tommy Robinson's somebody completely else, and he sort of adopted that nickname. It's funny to think back now when we were doing our research. He's addressed the Oxford Union. He did that like nearly a decade ago.
Yeah.
He was on LBC with Nick Ferrari in 2013 and had a debate with a Muslim called Fayaz Mergel. Should just have a little listen to that.
I admit there's racists in the EDL.
We need to admit it.
Of course, I'm not.
We need to admit.
Naive.
And how do you feel about that?
I don't feel good about it.
Yeah.
And there's racists in. We've got golfers in the EDL. It's not a golf society. You know what I mean? We're not a racist organisation. There's racists in the Metropolitan Police Force.
We want to move forward. The key thing is to move forward here. You say you want to create change. Great. Other people want to create change. But Tommy, let's stop being an angry young man.
All right.
Let's work with the people who can actually try to make a difference.
Who's going to work with the English Defence League? Who's going to work with the working class representatives?
Listen,
across our
I tell
country?
you what,
Would you two meet or speak regularly?
I meet with imams. I meet with Interfaith from Dewsbury. Fella comes down. I meet with quite a lot regularly.
Mr. McGuff?
We, as Tommy said, I'm happy to meet with anyone. For the sake of this country and peace and stability, I will meet with anyone. But I will not meet with those people who attempt to create tensions for Tommy or myself or our families or other people.
And what have you learned about the EDL this morning?
Well, what I've learnt about the EDL is actually, I've always thought this before, Tommy seems to be a man at least, I mean, I don't agree with a lot of his views, but the fact is he's receptive.
So it's not true that these people have never had a platform. They did on the mainstream media. Tommy Robinson showed up in the audience of a BBC panel show. And the most famous example is Nick Griffin, former leader of the British National Party, one-eyed right-winger, far right-winger, who appeared on Question Time on the panel.
Yeah. And people said at the time that he proved so unpopular that was brilliant. It destroyed him and the BNP. Not quite, though.
No, not quite at all. I mean, people are split over what it did. On the one hand, the panel turned on him. He was aggressively questioned. He fluffed various answers. He was associated with the Klan and with the Holocaust, so it was very bad for his image and his reputation. On the other hand, he was put on a mainstream broadcaster, which was put on the BBC, which gave him a certain status, but also the pylon itself, some people felt, including within his organisation, actually helped the BNP, and it created sympathy for it. So the very process of, if you like, to be crude, the very process of burning the witch gave Satanism a new platform.
Yes. So there's controversy around whether people like him Nick Griffin, David Irving and others should actually be given platforms.
Yeah.
In the absence of them having mainstream media platforms, they're then enabled to do two things. They're enabled to go and record whatever they like and basically publish it with impunity. And they're also then emboldened to say, I have to do this on here because the mainstream media won't countenance my points.
Yeah.
And I refer to Tommy Robinson having recorded this film called Silenced. And the mainstream media won't play it because it's highly defamatory and currently the subject of a legal case.
Yes.
And yet he's able to say, I am being shut down by the mainstream media, therefore I have this platform. And then that makes him more enticing.
Yeah.
And also gives him, I think, more carte blanche to just spread misinformation wherever he can, because no one's really policing it.
They're also not obliged to show that film, right? No one is morally obliged to show anything that someone has produced.
No.
I mean, you mentioned in passing David Irving, who is famous as a Holocaust denier, and he was involved in a defamation trial over the Holocaust with Deborah Lipstadt. He appeared on Newsnight to defend himself, and he was cross-examined. And, you know, again, some will say by putting him on there, you actually promote him. Others will say that he was exposed as a charlatan. But a key thing to remember about Irving is he put himself into that trial. He forced people to judge his views. And prior to that, he had a very successful publishing career. The idea that he was shut down, that no one had heard of him, that's nonsense. I mean, the fact that we know who he is indicative of the fact that he did get plenty of exposure. And likewise, Tommy Robinson got plenty of exposure.
On that point about Newsnight, I mean, let's just remind ourselves that Anjem Chowdhury appeared on Newsnight with
Right.
Jeremy Paxman.
Right.
Let's just listen to that for a sec.
By Anjem Chowdhury of Islam for UK and by Majid Nawaz from the counter-extremism think tank, the Quilliam Foundation. I see in your statement today that this decision, in your judgment, is a victory for Islam and for Muslims. How does that work?
Well, absolutely, because if you believe in something, then it should be good for all times and places. The government advocate democracy and freedom. Supposedly, their own soldiers are dying for freedom and democracy in Afghanistan. And yet, when we expose their foreign policy, as we did with the mere suggestion of having a procession in Wootton Bassett, suddenly you find that freedom dissipates and you have dictatorship.
And how's the campaign to move Britain over to Sharia law coming along?
Well, this is in the hands of God. We do our best to
Going
propagate Islam. Well, of course it is. I think many people will see that democracy and freedom is no good for the British, no good for Afghanistan, and in fact, we need an alternative. And like man-made law, the Sharia is not something which gives you a right today to take it away tomorrow. It's good in all times and places.
So in a way, I quite liked it when people like Chowdhury had a platform on things like Newsnight, because at least the arguments could be made. And you used to relish, actually, Paxman tearing these people apart.
Yeah.
The trouble is, Newsnight's not what it was. TV news has declined. People aren't watching it religiously like they used to, circa 1997. You've then got that vacuum being created, I think, between how the mainstream media can report things and everyone else wanting the information earlier than it used to be. So say, if you look at the case of Southport, and it's a little bit like Nicola Bulley, and to an extent it's a bit like Jay Slater, the media is in a position with Southport where they can only report so much because the suspect is underage and hasn't been named. In the old days, Tim, there would be a conversation taking place between the press and police about what information we could include and what we couldn't, and we wait for charges to be brought, then proceedings are active, and you've just got to be very, very careful about the information that you release to the public and all the rest of it. That used to go on sort of in private, and people would be patient and wait for more information in the news pages. What we now have, and we've talked about this before on the Daily Tea, I talked about it with Kamal, one of the problems with Southport was that vacuum was created only to be filled by people not necessarily knowing what on earth they were talking about. And I mean both sort of citizen journalists and indeed politicians, because we talked about Nigel Farage and others spreading some of the misinformation, like the suspect was being tracked by MI6 and, oh, they came here illegally by boat. That was said, by the way, even after newspapers had reported that the suspect came from Cardiff, was born in the UK to Rwandan parents, who I think it was pointed out were church-going. So that whole he's a Muslim immigrant narrative could have been shut down initially. Instead, what happened is the whole thing blew up. So you've now got an online community filling a void.
Yeah, the vacuum is filled with speculation, ignorant and malicious. Now, having said that, some people will be listening to this podcast and tearing their hair out and saying, you two are a pair of elitist snobs who are out of date. You represent the old order media, which wanted to mediate everything and control the flow of information. And what you can't stand is your sales are down and you've been replaced, as has TV, by the online world, that this is a technological, not an ideological change. It's just like with the invention of the printing press destroying, I don't know, the illuminated manuscript, the internet has destroyed the old press, and now people are free to look at things and to read all the information that gets put out there, false or accurate, and make up their own mind. And this is, whether it's a good or a bad thing, it's just the state of play. There was an interesting, we're back to X, I'm afraid, Konstantin Kisin, who is a Russian-British comedian who is very outspoken on free speech issues, who argues that if it weren't for X, we wouldn't have known that the gangs of armed and masked Muslim men were rampaging through cities. He pointed out that left-wingers as well as right-wingers have posted misinformation. This is not just, to do with far-right people. He says, like it or not, human beings invented mass communication platforms, and these things are not going away. And governments and legacy media would love to crack down on them in order to re-establish narrative control. And he also argues, I think it's very interesting, he says social media still needs a lot of work, and things like community notes are an important first step in the right direction. This comes back to what we were saying earlier about what should regulate things. Community notes is a way of fact-checking, but it's also a way of checking human behavior through ridicule. So very often someone will say something that just turns out to be absurdly untrue, whether it be a random anonymous poster or Kamala Harris will say something daft, and there'll be a really amusing community note underneath it which says this just isn't true. So the argument is kind of that you've just got to let social media evolve and it will develop its own rules. I mean, our regulator is a voluntary one.
Yes.
Ipso. We are not regulated by statute. We are regulated by ourselves. And there's a case for saying maybe you just got to let the public decide for themselves what's right and what's wrong and regulate their own behavior.
I mean, we regulate the comments that come into the website, okay? And we have filters which ensure that racist, homophobic or other offensive comments aren't included, while at the same time giving the Telegraph audience the space to express themselves as freely as possible.
Yes.
When it comes to that line, it's kind of, I mean, this from Kisin is quite cutting, actually. We're not going back to governments and the media being in charge of what's true. Politicians and journalists are the least trusted groups in society for a reason.
Ow.
Ouch.
By the way, I'm not sure online pundits are much more trusted.
Well, exactly. And also the other thing is,
Kitten's got claws.
It's all very well to say, okay, well, let's just have an online medium that publishes fact with fiction. You can't really tell the difference between the two.
Yeah.
You hope that what you're reading and sharing is right, but it might not be.
Yeah.
I think when it comes down to us being discerning adults, that's fine. When it comes to my children, getting all of their intel from TikTok, that's hugely worrying and disturbing.
Yeah.
Unless you've got a really robust education system in place and a national curriculum that teaches them which are the trusted sources and which aren't.
Yeah.
But this denigration of journalism, like it's nothing, to be trained both legally and otherwise to report the news as impartially, fairly and contemporaneously as possible while ensuring it's right. What the internet has created is this environment where it doesn't matter if it's right, I've just got to get it out first.
Yes.
I've got to be first.
Yeah.
No, get it right first, for the love of God.
I also think there is subjectivity in interpretation, and one should respect all different views, unless they break the law, and publish them, yes. But there's a part of me which also does still think there is this thing called the truth. That in an incident, there is a factual account. We might not be able to get all the facts.
Yes.
The facts might be interpreted in the wrong way. But there is actually, in history, a thing that happened, and it definitely happened that way. And our job is to try to get to the bottom of it. And to go right back to the beginning of this conversation, Elon's tweet is all about civil war in Britain being inevitable. Now, of course, we being British know that's not true.
Yes.
We know that right now we're not living through a civil war. From outside, you see pockets of violence and might think that country is breaking down, but we know that's not the truth. So what Elon said there, which is he's both commenting on current events, but he's also prophesying into the future, Elon, you're just wrong.
Yes. Journalism 101, Tim, when you go to college and you learn this stuff, the who, where, what, where.
Yeah.
The who, where, what, when, how questions have to be answered. Then you're talking about things being grounded in fact.
Yes.
What is the actual fact of the matter?
Yes.
And then we can have discussions like we do about the why, I suppose, to go beyond the headline of the fact and delve into the reasons for all this, the justifications, the explanations, the mitigations. That in itself is interesting. The other thing I object to, by the way, as a journalist, is this idea that there isn't a massive diversity of opinion across mainstream media.
Yeah.
There's the criticism of the BBC for being too left-wing. There's the criticism of us for being too right-wing. There's from the Spectator to the New Statesman, most views are represented in this country if only people would bother to read it.
Yeah. And instead they retreat into silos. And that doesn't help. But again, I'm conscious that some people will hear this and just think that we're having a big moan about the new media.
No, we're not.
No,
Look,
we're not.
we
And we're
love
on the new media. We love the new media.
Also, much as I criticise X and think to myself, if I wasn't a journalist, I wouldn't have to be on this god-awful platform, which is so irritating. Some of the criticism has been good for my profile. I quite like it when the haters put my articles up and tell everyone why they're so rubbish, and then just everyone then piles in and shares these articles. That's great.
And you're going to share some comments, and I have a real issue with them. So
okay, go on then.
Here we go. No,
well,
you tell us the comments.
This is the Telegraph reader response to Elon Musk. Paul Lever says, Elon Musk believes strongly in free speech. He will allow and promote criticism of himself on his own platform. Or Keir, a leftist human rights lawyer who appears to hate free speech. That's one view. Martin Ridley says, the left is forever pumping out misinformation, and leftist organisations attack constantly any group it disapproves of. Consider the campaigns against Israel, Trump, GB News, Farage, and of course the onslaught against the Tories. When Comrade Starmer complains about social media, it's because people dare hold a different narrative to his. His preferred future is cancel culture. Musk is a libertarian. He believes in free speech. The previous owners of what was Twitter were as deeply censorious as Facebook is now.
Right. So Elon believes in free speech. He sacked workers at Twitter who publicly criticized him. Elon believes in freedom. He won't allow his workers to unionize. Right? So it is a freedom which happens to align with the interests of a really, really rich American industrialist. That's my problem. And I go right back to what I said at the beginning. I don't believe in free speech in the sense that I think people say they want free speech, but what they're really saying is, A, my view is not being heard loudly enough, and B, I'd like the freedom to shout over you so that everyone can hear me. The day that Elon Musk says to Tesla workers, guys, you can unionize and you can criticize me as much as you like in public, I'll believe that he's just a big old cuddly libertarian. But I don't. I don't believe it.
Tim Stanley, speaking like a socialist on the Daily Tea. Who would have thought it?